Unaware of the $50 million inheritance, Richard and his younger sister Monica were thrown out of their foster parents' home just days after their biological parents died. You have 48 hours to pack your things and leave, Margaret Wellington said coldly, arms folded, as she stared at Richard and Monica, two children who had lived under her roof for 15 years. We no longer have any obligation to provide for you. The iciness in the voice of the woman Richard had called Mom cut deeper than any knife. At 21, he had just lost his birth parents in a car accident 2 weeks earlier. Now he and 17-year-old Monica were being cast out into the streets. But, "You're our family," Monica whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "We grew up here." Richard Wellington didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Different family, girl. You'll have to fend for yourselves now." Anger and disbelief surged inside Richard. The Wellingtons had taken him in at the age of 6 after his grandmother passed. For 15 years, he truly believed he was part of this white middle-class household. He graduated top of his class, earned a full scholarship in engineering, always striving to prove himself worthy of the affection and investment he thought they had given. But what he didn't know was that after the funeral, Margaret and Richard Wellington had discovered something in his parents' records, something that made them both nervous and eager to sever ties with the children as quickly as possible. "Did our parents leave us anything?" Richard asked, a strange hunch rising within him. "Money, insurance, debt." Margaret cut in swiftly, almost too quickly. "Only debt. That's why you need to go. We can't shoulder any more financial burdens." Richard studied her face carefully. Something was off, the restlessness, the haste. Not the demeanor of someone truly worried about money. The Wellingtons lived in a mansion in Alpharetta, owned 3 imported cars, and Margaret's handbags cost more than minimum wage salaries. "At least give us a week," Monica pleaded, "just to find somewhere to live." 48 hours, Richard repeated this time, snapping his paper shut. "And only take what you brought with you. Leave the rest." That night, while Monica wept in the room they had shared for 15 years, Richard lay awake, unsettled. The Wellingtons had never been affectionate, but never this cruel. The sudden coldness, the rush to evict them right after receiving those documents from his parents, it didn't add up. In the haze of memory, Richard still recalled his parents, David and Angela Carter, as hardworking, loving people. David worked in logistics. Angela was a teacher. They were simple, decent souls gone too soon in a tragic accident. But if they were so ordinary, why were the Wellingtons so desperate to cut ties with their legacy? That night, as the world slept, Richard had a feeling, one that would change everything. 48 hours later, Richard and Monica sat in a 24/7 diner booth, their entire lives packed into 2 worn backpacks. Richard had tried withdrawing money at the ATM only to find his debit card frozen, the joint account he'd used since his teens had been erased of his name. "They really did it," Monica whispered, stirring a cold cup of coffee she didn't drink. 15 years. Gone like we never existed. Richard stared out the grimy window at the morning traffic, Uber drivers, night shift workers, people the Wellingtons had once lived comfortably above. "Something's not right," he said, pulling out a crumpled photo, his parents with him at his high school graduation. "Remember how Mom Angela always said Dad David was careful with money, how he planned everything?" Monica nodded. "She said he was obsessed with leaving something for us. Always talking about insurance investments." "Exactly. And now suddenly the Wellingtons say he left debt. No way. A man like Dad wouldn't leave debt." "Monica, he left a plan." Richard's phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Wellington. "Hope you find a place to stay. We've cleared your room and donated your old things to charity. Good luck in life." The indifference hit like a slap. 15 years of Christmases, birthdays, graduations reduced to a cold farewell from a stranger. "She donated our stuff," Richard muttered, showing Monica the message. "Including Dad's wooden chest." His face went pale. That small wooden chest their father had given them as kids, telling them to keep it safe. They had never opened it. As children, they had shoved it to the back of the closet and forgotten it. "I'm calling her Richard," decided, dialing Margaret. "Hello?" Her voice was sharp with annoyance. "Margaret, it's Richard. About our things. There was a small wooden chest in the closet. It belonged to our father." "Oh, that. It went to charity, too." "Why, there might have been documents, photos, Richard's sweetheart." Her tone shifted into condescending patience, like she was scolding a stubborn child. You need to move on. Clinging to silly trinkets won't build your future. Which charity, I don't remember. Richard handled it. Silence. Richard. I truly hope you find your own path, but please don't contact us again. That chapter of our lives is over. The call ended. Richard stared at the phone, a cold fury rising in his chest. The woman who had adopted him sat through his school plays, taken him to the doctor when he was sick, now spoke to him as if he were some bothersome salesman. They wanted that chest gone, he told Monica. They were too quick to throw everything out. Monica frowned. You think they know something? I think they know a lot. Richard opened the old laptop he had bought with money earned from part-time jobs during college. If the Wellingtons thought two orphaned kids would quietly vanish, they had badly miscalculated. At 21, Richard possessed something they had completely underestimated: the relentless stubbornness of someone who had grown up constantly having to prove their worth. What are you doing? Monica asked. Researching, Richard replied, fingers already flying over the keyboard. If Dad really left something for us, it has to be recorded somewhere. Wills, life insurance, bank accounts. There's always a trail. For hours, as the diner emptied and filled again, Richard scoured public records, government websites, anything he could find on David Carter and his logistics company. What he discovered only strengthened his suspicion that something was amiss. David Carter was far from an ordinary employee. He held minority stakes in the company, owned multiple properties, and at least 3 bank accounts that Richard traced. Most importantly, he had filed a will with the county clerk's office just 6 months before his death. Monica, he said, a tense excitement in his voice, David left a will. It's here in the public records. What does it say? That's what we'll find out tomorrow, in court. Richard closed the laptop, a cold determination etched into his heart. The Wellingtons had made a fatal error, underestimating the intellect of a young black man from the projects, a man who had learned early that with people like them, the only true protection came from knowledge and preparation. Every act of contempt, every belittling lie Margaret and Richard had ever directed at him was being carefully recorded in his mind. They had thought they were ridding themselves of a burden, but in reality they had created an enemy who would never rest until he unearthed the truth. And something inside Richard told him that the truth would be bigger and more ruthless than any desperate orphan could imagine. The next morning, Richard and Monica arrived at the probate court as soon as it opened. The clerk, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, took only 15 minutes to locate David Carter's will in the records. Here it is, he said, handing them a copy. Filed 6 months ago, very detailed. Richard began reading and felt the world spin. David Carter hadn't just left assets, he had left an empire. Shares in 4 companies, real estate across 3 states, investment accounts, life insurance, and a trust that had grown to over $50 million. Monica, he whispered, voice trembling, look at this. Monica peered over his shoulder, eyes wide. 50 million? Richard, that means? The Wellingtons knew exactly what they were doing when they kicked us out. The will was explicit. Everything would belong to Richard when he turned 21, and Monica would inherit her share at 18. It also included detailed provisions for education, health care, and a trusted administrator to manage the trust. The appointed trustee was James Morrison, a wealth attorney David had known professionally. Richard called him immediately. Carter Morrison's voice was full of surprise. God, I've been trying to find you for 2 years. Where have you been? Long story, Richard replied. Can we meet today? 2 hours later, they were in Morrison's elegant downtown Atlanta office. The lawyer, a black man in his 60s with commanding presence, listened silently to their entire story, his expression growing increasingly grave. Let me make sure I understand, he finally said. The Wellingtons adopt you, gain access to all your parents' paperwork after their deaths, then immediately strip your inheritance, claiming there's nothing, and destroy or hide anything that could link you to your past? Yes, Richard confirmed. And they erased or concealed everything. Morrison leaned back, fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. Richard, you turned 21 3 months ago. Legally, all of this belongs to you. Monica, you'll turn 18 in 6 months and your portion will transfer then. But how did they hide this from you for so long? Because when we were adopted, we were minors and trusted our foster parents to inform us of any inheritance. They simply lied. Morrison opened a drawer, pulling out a thick folder. I documented everything. Returned letters, unanswered emails. The Wellingtons had a system for blocking all communication. Monica leaned forward. So, they committed crimes. Many crimes, Morrison nodded. Hiding an inheritance, misappropriation, even potentially fraud. If proven, they could face decades in prison. A strange calm washed over Richard. Can we prove it? Morrison smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes but carried the promise of justice. Richard, I've logged every irregularity over the past 2 years. Blocked letters, ignored attempts to reach you. I even hired investigators to track you down. The Wellingtons didn't realize it, but they built a criminal record against themselves. That afternoon, as Morrison began processing the legal procedures, Richard carried out the plan he had made the night before he called Margaret Wellington. Richard, her voice sharp with irritation. I thought we made it clear we didn't want contact. I just wanted to let you know we found a place to stay. Richard lied, and we're fine. Good. We hope you settle in. Actually, Margaret, I have a question. Do you happen to remember the name of the attorney who handled my father's paperwork? There are a few forms I need for work. A long pause. I don't remember. And even if I did, I'm not sure it would help. Of course I understand. I thought maybe you had a business card or something. Never mind. Richard, listen. Perhaps it's best to let the past rest. Some things are better left untouched. Margaret's trembling voice sounded like a lullaby in Richard's ears, but the resolve in his heart was unshakable. Why would you say that just some things can get complicated, legally complicated for all parties involved? Richard almost laughed. Margaret had just revealed herself. I completely understand. Anyway, thank you. The moment he hung up, he called Morrison. She knows. She sounded worried, talking about legal complications. Is that proof they knew about the inheritance? That's just the beginning. But we need more than that. What exactly? Richard asked bluntly. We need them to admit it themselves or accidentally say something even clearer. Do you have the courage to use a recording device next time you talk to her? Richard thought about the coldness with which the Wellingtons had treated them, the speed with which they discarded 15 years of foster family ties, and Margaret's words let the past rest. No courage needed, he replied. It'll be more like pleasure. That night, Richard and Monica moved into the small apartment Morrison had arranged, temporarily funded by an advance from the Inheritance Trust. For the first time in weeks, they had a safe place to sleep and time to strategize. Are you sure about this? Monica asked. Sure about what? Facing the Wellingtons directly. Richard looked out the window as city lights flickered on. 2 days ago, they had been nothing more than orphaned children abandoned by the only family they had. Now they had discovered they were millionaire heirs and their foster parents had lied to hide the truth. Monica, they saw us suffer, humiliated us, and threw us out like garbage, all while knowing we were richer than they were. And now Richard lifted his phone, checking the recording app. Now they're going to learn just how wrong they were. The plan was simple. One last visit, ask innocently about the documents and the inheritance. With a little luck, their arrogance would make them admit something usable in court. What Richard couldn't anticipate was that in the past 2 days, Margaret Wellington, driven by mounting fear, had consulted her own attorney and learned exactly how much she and Richard would lose if the truth came out. And Richard was about to discover that desperate people could take far more extreme actions than simply kicking 2 children out of a house. The next morning, Richard and Monica stood once again at the Wellingtons' front door. But this time Richard carried more than desperation, a recording device in his pocket, and the certainty that the next 15 minutes would change everything. Margaret opened the door, her face initially angry, quickly masked by awkward worry. Richard, Monica, what are you doing here? We just want 5 minutes, Richard said calmly, about our biological father's documents. Richard appeared behind her, visibly annoyed. There's nothing left to say. We've said it all. Actually, Richard offered a faint smile. I think you've only said half. The Wellingtons exchanged a quick glance, the guilty look of people who know trouble is coming. Come in, Margaret finally said, but make it quick. In the living room where they had grown up, Richard watched the couple sink into the sofa defensively. 15 years of memories surged back, and now he understood they had never truly welcomed him here. You knew about the inheritance, Richard said bluntly. It wasn't a question. What inheritance? Margaret stammered, trying to feign genuine surprise, her voice shaky. The $50 million my father left for Monica and me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret went pale and Richard fiddled nervously with his watch. We don't know what you're talking about, Margaret muttered, her voice lacking conviction. Richard pulled several folders from his bag. The will was filed at the county office. Business shares, investment accounts, the trust, everything documented, legal and rightfully ours. How did you get... Richard started, then stopped himself. Get what, Richard? Richard leaned forward. How would we know what you've been hiding for 2 years? Margaret jumped to her feet. We didn't hide anything, we just protected you from responsibilities you weren't ready to handle. Protected us. Monica spoke for the first time, her voice choked with anger. By throwing us out on the street with nothing. You were too young for that money, Richard shouted. You would have wasted it all. At least this way you learn the value of hard work. Richard almost smiled. They were exposing themselves completely. So you admit you knew about the money, he asked coldly. Margaret realized her husband's mistake too late. We only suspected, never confirmed. Suspected enough to block every attempt Morrison made to reach us for 2 years. Richard continued, watching panic spread across their faces. Morrison, Margaret whispered, choking on the name. The estate administrator. He documented every returned letter, ignored email, every blocked attempt at contact you orchestrated. Richard tried one last feeble defense. Even if that's true, you can't prove we did it intentionally. Actually, Richard stood up. We already have proof. At that moment, Morrison entered the room, followed by 2 private investigators and a bailiff. Margaret's face transformed into pure horror. How did you get into my house? Monica let us in 5 minutes ago, Morrison responded calmly. While you were confessing to these serious offenses, everything was being recorded on the device. Richard tried to rise, but his legs shook like jelly. A recording device? You can't. That's illegal. Morrison smiled. Actually, recording is entirely legal when one party consents, and Richard and Monica did consent. One of the investigators stepped closer to Margaret, handing her a folder. Mrs. Wellington, this is the official notice of a civil lawsuit against you for concealing inheritance assets, unlawful appropriation, and deliberate interference in family relations. And that's just the beginning, Morrison added. The district attorney's office is also taking a keen interest in the criminal aspects of your actions. Margaret slumped onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. We only wanted to protect the children. They were too young. Protect Richard finally let a trace of anger slip into his voice. You threw us out, left us homeless. You watched us struggle for 2 years, all the while knowing we were wealthier than you could ever be in a lifetime. In desperation, she tried to explain. That money is still safe. The children will get it all. They won't just get it back. Morrison interjected. They'll also receive accrued interest compensation for emotional distress and legal fees for both parties. Monica looked around the mansion she had grown up in, but this time with completely different eyes. You know what's sad, she said. If you had been honest with us, we could have still been a family. But now, you're just 2 strangers who committed crimes against us. The bailiff handed over another folder. All Wellington assets will be frozen until this case is resolved in court. Margaret lifted her head, eyes red, her voice pleading. Richard, Monica, please. We loved you like our own children. We made mistakes, but... No, Richard cut her off decisively. Real parents don't throw their children out. Real parents don't lie about an inheritance. Real parents don't watch their children suffer when they could help. Morrison nodded to the investigators. I think we have everything we need. As they left the mansion for the last time, Richard could hear Margaret sobbing and yelling into the phone at her attorney, trying to limit the damage. How do you feel? Morrison asked as they stepped toward the car. Richard turned back to the house where he had once believed he was loved for 15 years. I feel free. But the true freedom, Richard would soon realize, didn't come just from exposing the truth. It would come when he built something so remarkable that the Wellingtons would spend the rest of their lives in regret for underestimating the 2 children they once discarded like trash. 6 months later, Richard sat in the office of the tech consulting firm he had founded with part of his inheritance, looking out over Atlanta from the 30th floor. At 22, he had created 15 jobs and was negotiating contracts that could change the lives of hundreds of families. Monica, now 18 and officially inheriting her share, had chosen a different but equally meaningful path. She enrolled in law school, specializing in civil rights, determined to help other families avoid the injustice they had suffered. "Did you see the news today?" Monica asked, entering the office with a newspaper in hand. Richard smiled. "I saw it." The headline on the front page read, "Alpharetta elite couple convicted of multi-million-dollar inheritance fraud." The accompanying photo showed Margaret and Richard Wellington being escorted out of court in handcuffs. The comprehensive investigation had uncovered a much larger scheme. The Wellingtons weren't just cruel, they were systematic criminals, having done the same to other adoptive families, consistently targeting black orphans whose biological parents left substantial estates or life insurance. 5 years in prison, each Monica read aloud, plus full restitution with compound interest and damages. The judge called it one of the most calculated and ruthless inheritance fraud cases he'd ever seen. Morrison had done an exceptional job. Not only did they reclaim the entire inheritance, but the Wellingtons were forced to pay an additional $10 million in damages. The mansion where Richard and Monica had grown up was auctioned to cover legal costs. But true justice came from public humiliation. The case became a national headline, and the Wellingtons became a symbol of racial discrimination masquerading as philanthropy. Margaret lost all her elite social connections. Richard had been fired from his financial consulting firm when clients canceled contracts en masse. "Want to know what gives me the most satisfaction?" Richard leaned back in his chair. "It's not the money. It's that now everyone knows exactly who they really are." Even more surprisingly, Belle Wellington, their biological daughter, publicly sought out Richard and Monica to apologize for what her parents had done. Now a nurse living a modest life, she refused any money connected to her parents' fraudulent scheme. "You didn't deserve any of this," Belle said, tears in her eyes. "I always knew my parents were cold, but I never imagined they could be this cruel. You two are my real family more than they ever were." The fund Richard and Monica founded, the David Carter Foundation, has helped over 50 adoptive families expose hidden or stolen inheritances. They hired a dedicated investigative team to track similar fraud cases. Morrison, now more than just a lawyer but almost a surrogate father, established legal protocols other families could follow. The Carter process quickly became a standard approach among lawyers across the United States. "Remember when Margaret said there are some things best left alone?" Monica laughed. "That some legal matters are just too complicated." Richard shook his head, still incredulous at the arrogance the Wellingtons had shown right to the very end. "She was only right about one thing," he replied. "Legally complicated, but for them." Just last weekend, Richard had bought a modest but cozy house in the very neighborhood where he and Monica had spent nights sleeping in diners while homeless. Not because he needed to save money, but because he wanted to remember where they had come from. "Have you ever wondered what our lives would have been like if they'd been honest?" Monica asked. Richard paused, thoughtful. "Maybe we'd have lived comfortably but still dependent on them. We'd never have discovered the true strength within ourselves." The irony wasn't lost on him. It was the Wellingtons' cruelty that had forced Richard and Monica to grow stronger, more independent, and more determined than they ever could have been raised in luxury. Now Margaret Wellington lived in a government-subsidized apartment, working at a laundromat to pay off legal debts. Richard, by contrast, sold insurance over the phone, a job he got only because she had tried to conceal her record when applying. The final chapter of the story had closed perfectly. The two children, once deemed too young to manage money, now ran a financial and charitable empire. Meanwhile, those who had considered themselves superior struggled to cover basic living expenses. "You know what's the best part of all this?" Richard said, looking at the photo of David and Angela Carter on his desk. "Our biological parents didn't just leave us money, they left us values. And it was those values that guided us to do what was right." Monica smiled. "The sweetest revenge is success." Richard nodded, eyes tracing the bustling traffic below the city. "The Wellingtons tried to destroy us, but in the end they destroyed themselves. We learned that true wealth isn't in the inheritance, but in the character you build when no one is watching." The story of Richard and Monica Carter proved a simple but powerful truth. When you try to bury people of integrity, sometimes you forget that seeds grow strongest in the darkest soil. If this story of justice and resilience in the face of adversity inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. What's the greatest injustice you've ever faced, and how did you overcome it?